And if you didn't know by now, my name is Chad, and as always, I'm joined by my tag team partner on the two-man power trip, the one and only JP John Paz. And starting off a little bit on a somber note here, actually not a little bit, a lot of bit here on a very sad note, as we're here to promote our TMPT Con 3 with Jim Cornette and the 35th anniversary of the Midnight Express, but unfortunately are experiencing a giant loss to not only the two-man power trip entity that you're listening to, but to the world of professional wrestling, as Chris Pallies, also known as King Kong Bundy, has unfortunately passed away. Now, this past Monday, we announced that King Kong Bundy was going to be joining us in Richmond, so it almost tied in perfectly with this episode of posting Jim Cornette talking about the show and lining up nearly absolutely synced in the way we couldn't have written it better. But unfortunately, Chris passing away unexpectedly at some point, we're assuming over the weekend. As you listen to this, not a lot of details have come out about it. So we've talked about this between John and I, and we're going to cover it more in depth with Shane Douglas on the Triple Threat podcast in the next podcast we publish. But we had to kind of talk about it at least at first, just because A, we just announced him for TMPT Con 3, and B, if you only knew the amount of work going on behind the scenes with the two-man power trip, John more specifically than myself, but just the two-man power trip entity, a podcast that was in the works with King Kong Bundy that was coming to the two-man power trip podcasting empire, but just an absolutely devastating blow to professional wrestling. And John, we're going to talk about this just for a few minutes here before we get into talking about the Cornette interview. And like I said, we're going to talk about it more on the Triple Threat with Shane Douglas. But obviously, thoughts, if you can. I know it's still hard to process this. We're still kind of collectively in shock, but you more specifically, having dealt with Chris, I mean, really on a weekly basis for about the last 6 months. Sorry for the loss, but also, just a devastating blow to pro wrestling.
Yeah, just still kind of in shock a bit over it. Like, it really hit me hard. I mean, I was just totally shocked because only a few nights ago, we probably had about a half hour or so conversation, a little bit about this new up-and-coming podcast. He wanted this, he wanted that, he wanted a certain way to format it that you obviously were in the planning with it as well. A certain way he wanted to format it, how he kind of wanted to kind of build up to certain big moments like WrestleMania 1, WrestleMania 2, WrestleMania 3, and kind of have that be the last part of the podcast as far as segmenting on the episode. So it means all that kind of stuff that you talk about, but then he always like to talk about the family, how's everybody doing, because he knew my wife a little bit, knew the kids a little bit. So, it was a little bit more of a friendly talk, and he was always especially for the last 6 months to a year, basically really got real close with him and became very friendly with him. So we basically had a talk, I'd say, at least once a week. If it wasn't through text message, we probably had a nice lengthy phone call just about random things, random stories. He would always mention random stuff. And I know this episode's about Cornette, and he was looking forward to going down to Richmond because he said he wanted to bust Cornette's balls about some story that Cornette said and swore it was true, blah, blah, and Chris wanted to kind of just bust his balls and tell him it isn't true, and kind of, typical Chris fashion, just kind of, needle him a little bit. So that's kind of always the funny thing, and I think about Cornette and how this kind of ties in kind of an ironic way, is that he wanted to be a part of that show. He wanted to needle Cornette a little bit. I always thought that was funny. It's like, man, he's just a different breed as far as some of the things that he would do and say, and he'd not really necessarily be a bully or try to get under people's skin, but he just had his own kind of breed of comedy and his own way of handling things and own way of kind of doing things that I always thought was hilarious and straight to the point. And it's probably why we got along so well, just because I understood him and the way he was and kind of his breed of comedy. And I guess he liked my sarcasm, but he definitely just an unbelievable guy. Everyone has kind of their own story with him and their own moment. And a lot of people say, "Oh, he's the big bad heel. He's a vicious King Kong Bundy," or "Oh, he was mean," or blah blah. The real Chris Pallies, not King Kong Bundy, but the real Chris Pallies was one of the nicest guys I've ever met. Like a true friend, true nice guy. I've seen him with the homeless. He didn't have to do anything. We're walking by these people. He's giving them money right out of his pocket. Just little things you see, like good people things. You know what I mean? Like just things that necessarily really good people with really good hearts would do. And you don't quite see that. He might be the only guy that we've ever worked with that ends up giving us money back because, this reason or that reason, or oh, here's gas money. I sold more pictures than I thought I'd sell. Or, hey, I sold a couple figures. Here, why don't you take a percentage? I mean, he was so nice. It never had anybody. I mean, man, we worked with hundreds of wrestlers. No wrestler has ever done that. Just what a nice guy, class act, true friend, and we're definitely going to miss him.
Yeah, obviously a huge loss, and you too with your personalities. I think if you look up the word ball busters, and that's the quote I used on Twitter, ball busters. It's going to be you and KKB there, 1 and 2. I'm going to give him number 1. You could be number 2 just for the sake of he's King Kong Bundy and you're not. But yeah, we're going to talk about it more in depth on the Triple Threat podcast, but just wanted to touch on it here before we got into it with Cornette, because listen, if you do follow our episodes, or if you choose to go back and listen to episodes in the past, the last time we had on Jim Cornette, we also had on King Kong Bundy as a feature guest because he was promoting an appearance at Subway in New Jersey last year around May. So again, the ironic part of the two of these entities coming together one more time, it worked out perfectly, but it's a very, very sad day for the world of professional wrestling, and he's going to be sorely, sorely missed. And we will pick that up on the Triple Threat podcast with the franchise Shane Douglas and get Shane take on it, because John will tell the story on the Triple Threat podcast, but there was a connection between King Kong Bundy and Shane Douglas that, you might not expect, and it's actually a very surprising thing. And like John said, that he was very misunderstood. You will 100% get that when you hear the Triple Threat podcast. So we're going to